Yeah, I mean, think of it as emotional hygiene. It's like we brush our teeth every morning, sort of thing, to keep our teeth nice and fresh, sort of thing. It'd be nice to keep our body nice and fresh and our minds nice and fresh to
Mhm.
face the challenges of the day. And there's always going to be challenges, even if they're positive challenges. Um, so you want to be able to be in a good mind state to be able to navigate through life.
What happens when you are not allowed to safely feel and express your emotions? I wish the answer was that they disappear and go away. Unfortunately, that is not the way it works. Emotions will get stuck, and slowly they will wreak havoc in your mind, body, and in your life. I know this might sound cliche, but the only way out is through. And facing our emotions is something that comes with the territory of healing. This week, I am joined by Dion Crowe, a certified emotional freedom technique tapping practitioner who is committed to helping his clients heal, break free, and enjoy fulfilling lives. In this episode, we will talk about how being misdiagnosed can be costly, how EFT tapping and tension release exercises have helped Dion manage his C-PTSD symptoms, the importance of advocating for ourselves, and so much more. Hi, I am Raysa, a survivor of narcissistic abuse, and I have complex post traumatic stress disorder. And you are listening to Hello Trauma Brain, a podcast where I share my experiences living with complex PTSD. My hope is this podcast can help destigmatize mental health and provide support to anyone diagnosed with C-PTSD who thinks they might have it or has a loved one with this diagnosis. Quick reminder, I am not a licensed psychologist or mental health care professional, and this podcast is not meant to replace nor substitute the care of psychologists, other mental or medical health care professionals. If you think you might have complex PTSD or PTSD, please reach out to your primary care or mental health care provider. Any individuals and resources mentioned in this episode are not sponsoring Hello Trauma Brain. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by this week's guest are solely their own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Hello Trauma Brain and the host. This episode may reference trauma or abuse, and listener discretion is advised. Remember, you can always pause or skip this episode at any time. And now, let's get back to the episode. Hello, dear survivors, and welcome to this episode of Hello Trauma Brain. Thank you for joining me today. If you are listening on YouTube, a gentle reminder to hit the like button and subscribe to let me know this episode was helpful. Quick check in. Speaking of emotions, earlier today, I stopped the running game I've had going on for weeks and sat with my emotions for a little bit. I get why people don't want to do this and why I avoid it too. It did hurt like hell. It was so overwhelming, it scared me. And I sat there anyway and worked my way out of feeling all that overwhelmed with the tools I am learning in therapy. And though I feel better as I record this, I am aware that there is a lot more to feel still. I think what scared me the most was that for a moment it felt like it would kill me to feel that. And my body really went to a dark place quickly. And interestingly so, as quickly as I went there, that's how quickly I got out of that mindset. And I'm hoping I will remember that I can get out of that mindset next time. But yeah, that was really intense. And and if I am honest, one of the hardest parts of healing for me so far. Now, off to other things, I do want to remind anyone interested in seeing me perform this weekend on Saturday, March 9th at 7 p.m. in the Ice House in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. My friend George is performing his latest studio album, Terpsichore, and I did record vocals for the actual album, and I'm gonna be a part of the band that's playing the entire album this weekend, and I'm very honored to be part of this ensemble. And I will be linking both George's album and how to get tickets in the show notes. This week, I am joined by our second expert being featured in the podcast, Dion Crowe from Eflowtion Support Services. This is part one of our conversation, and you are so welcome to come back next week to hear part two. Now, without further delay, here is my conversation with Dion Crowe. All right, dear survivors, I am thrilled to introduce today Dion Crowe. Dion is the founder of Eflowtion Support Services, which operates from Brisbane, Australia. He offers EFT tapping services globally and provides support work services to individuals enrolled in the National Disability Insurance Scheme, a government-funded program. Prior to receiving a diagnosis of complex post-traumatic stress disorder in 2018, Dion spent around 30 years being incorrectly diagnosed and treated for absence seizures, a type of epilepsy, and schizoaffective disorder. It was only after comprehensive psychiatric and neurological reevaluations that Dion's true condition of C-PTSD was accurately identified. Dion operates a YouTube channel under the business name Eflowtion Support Services. On this channel, he not only shares videos about EFT tapping, but also provides informative content based on his professional and personal experiences with CPTSD and mental health. Thank you for joining me today, Dion, for this conversation. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling very hot as well. It's quite humid here in Brisbane, so we're in the middle of a heat wave at the moment. So it's definitely it's like having an outdoor sauna wherever you go.
Oh my gosh, my goodness, that sounds wild. I'm on the opposite end of the globe, so over here it's like 20 degrees. It feels like 4 today, and there's like snow outside, and it's brutally cold. We
I
need
would
to find a
somewhat prefer the
midpoint.
cold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From where I'm
And
standing,
meeting
I
close.
prefer the heat. I know, right? We need something in the
Somewhere in
middle.
the world that's got the right temperature.
That's right. We can wish coming up.
We've clearly been doing this wrong.
Hopefully we find that one point of the year where we're both having similar weather. Thank you again for
Well,
doing this, Dion.
no worries. Well, it's like I think I'd like to help people find their emotional balance. We just need to find that right temperament balance with the temperature.
Yeah, for sure, Dion. I want to start off the interview or this conversation, I should say, with asking you something that got prompted by your own bio. It is about your diagnosis. Being misdiagnosed for 30 years sounds like a really long time. And I was wondering, how does finally getting the complex PTSD diagnosed, how has that impacted the care that you receive and how you go about your treatment these days?
Yeah, it's a good question where like I guess we don't like to think of ourselves as our mental illness, but I guess it's how others perceive us. And in some ways, if we're receiving medical treatment, receiving a medical advice, there is a belief system of like, I am this or I am that. So whether you are staunch in your position of like, well, I don't identify as having CPTSD or this, uh, in your day-to-day life, it's kind of like an environment thing. You're subjected to your environment and what people think of you and how you relate to yourself in that. So, which is a roundabout way of saying like, it was a mind shift from being told that I have schizoaffective, being treated with that, so medication, and also the absence seizures, which even started younger. I had it originally diagnosed when I was, I think, in grade 3 or 4, when I was disassociating, where like they saw that as a form of epilepsy, which is what they termed then as petit mal, to now absence seizures, where you lose focus for a bit. Now, when you get re-diagnosed, so the I went under epilepsy under a neurologist, so that was coming off medication. You had to come off for the medication, then wait for 6 months. You couldn't drive a vehicle because you actually have to carry that on your license as well. So that's another thing, which I even got booked by the police because one day I forgot to have my little medical certificate. So there's
Wow.
also the financial costs as well of being misdiagnosed. But when you finally get that, like they do an EEG, that they test the brain waves, and it was actually a disassociation from trauma that was the absence seizures. The schizoaffective, of course, schizophrenia has such a well loved presentation in movies and everything like that,
Mm-hmm.
and even how you perceive of yourself, of like you're this mentally crazy person sort of thing. It is a real adjustment to go, oh wait, no, they were actually incorrect. It was C-PTSD all along, which is actually more common than we think, these misdiagnoses. And to actually re-identify as something else is not only a mind shift for myself, but also the environment. Because even for medical doctors, it's like there's kind of that look of like, yeah, well, is he faking it sort of thing? That sort of a so in terms of treatment, it meant coming off medication. So both for the schizoaffective and for the absence seizures, as I mentioned, I already came off and couldn't drive. For the schizoaffective, they titrated off, so you can't just stop. Otherwise, I mean, even if you miss a day of medication, it kind of feels like you're getting lightning strikes in your brain.
Wow.
And when that finally stopped, of course, everything that the medication was kind of, I always termed it as the blanket over the fire feel, that suppression feel.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's no treatment for that, there's no medication. So, in some regards, the medication was doing something, but the medication isn't going to address the trauma, it isn't going to address behaviors, it isn't going to address these sorts of things. And it definitely isn't going to process the trauma for you. It's not going to release the trauma. If anything, it's that blanket, it suppresses it. So, that's where it moved into actually the first treatment I got introduced was EFT tapping. So was one of the first ones. So and then it moved into seeing trauma informed psychologists and but unfortunately, shortly after I got re-diagnosed by my psychiatrist, who was the original person that diagnosed me with schizoaffective, he actually had to retire. So just at this life pivotal moment, because he had like back issues and that, it's like I got a phone call. It's like,
Oh,
yeah, it's like, sorry, I got to. So right at that pivotal moment, so it became like, okay, well, I've just had this life changing like advice and information of like we got it wrong, but now I've got to wander into the woods and find some form of direction
wow.
of like who am I now? So, and
Mm-hmm.
that's been a tricky journey, and even within the trauma field sort of thing, I've come across people that weren't too good with their intentions towards healing and all that. So it's been a real haphazard journey to actually get well. But along the way, I've found dependable even counselors and tried of different therapies that all moved me towards repositioning who I was as a person. But at the other time, it's also if you're not in an environment that's continually telling you you're unwell, then once you're outside of that, you can start to become well. You can start to change the narrative of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's changing that feedback loop. We all have our internal feedback loop, and then there's an external feedback loop that likes to feed into you being unwell.
Yeah. I thank you for sharing, Dion, and I want to start off by saying I'm so sorry that you went through that, and it is really sad to hear the stigma that a lot of mental illnesses can have, because even if you would have, if it turns out you had schizoaffective disorder, that shouldn't be something that doctors should be looking down upon, or it shouldn't be an indication of, oh, here he comes, now let's look out for the faker. Like it's really sad that that's still a reality. And I'm with you, and what you're talking about resonates in terms of like when we have the misdiagnosis, it really can wreak havoc, because we're not getting the help and the support and the treatment that is actually going to fix the thing. It's almost like putting a band-aid on an arm just because you're saying it's hurting on my arm, and nobody's x-rayed it and nobody's done the MRI, and it's broken on the like on the inside. If you do the testing, there's a breakage there that needs treatment, or maybe it needs a surgery, and a band-aid's not going to do it. And that's the equivalent of getting a misdiagnosis and people just slapping on the thing all these things that are not gonna work. And I'm fascinated by the fact that you found EFT so quickly after you were diagnosed with C-PTSD. And it turns out now that's the work that you do. How has EFT helped you in your personal healing, and how did you find yourself extending that same service to other people going through this too?
Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting story. There was EFT tapping and another therapy, which I actually don't talk about that much, and I don't know why. TRE exercises, and both of those were pivotal. EFT tapping, I was actually introduced to by my mother-in-law at the time. She was into a lot of different therapies. Some of those were to avoid actually dealing with emotions, but she introduced that to me. And the first person I came across was Brad Yates on YouTube. And at first, when you get described EFT tapping, it really doesn't make sense. And that, like, tapping on points whilst also focusing on a distressing issue, it's like we have this conditioned belief that no, it's sitting in a room talking about our emotions, cognitive behavioral therapy, these sorts of things. It's a rational process to actually deal with irrational emotions. So, but the thing with EFT tapping is a lot of our trauma is stored unconsciously. It's stored in the hippocampus, it's stored in our bodies. So engaging both the body and the mind to actually stimulate and release these stress responses, these stress triggers, starting to reduce that fight flight was beneficial. So when I started doing it, it was like, oh, I'm like yawning, I'm crying, I'm having all these releases from doing something where it's just, and EFT, how it's presented on YouTube videos, is different to how EFT tapping is in a session. It's not so much me philosophizing or talking, it's basically mimicking the words back that the person has of their issue, like this narcissistic abuse, this sort of stuff. It's using those words and the person hearing their voice, and also as a stimulating they say meridian lines, but then there's research into the premovascular system where they've actually found now the science where it's releasing actually has that physical release. So up till then, as I mentioned, everything was a medication based. Everything was sitting in a room talking to a psychologist, which has its place, but you can't actually deal with a trigger if you don't release the dynamite that's causing the explosion, sort of thing. You're always going to be, I mean, you might have a crying release, which actually might start to release some of that stored stuff. And if you've got a good therapist, then they'll be comfortable to hold that space. But if you are always just dealing with like, well, why did you get triggered, rather than what's causing the root cause of that? What's the charge? Can we discharge that somatic feeling in the body? That's the part where it's like EFT tapping started to release that. The other one that I mentioned was TRE exercise, which it's either known as trauma release exercises or tension release exercises. It's moving towards more tension release exercises, which, and even how it's described now, it used to be because you've got the psoas muscle in your hips, which is your fight, flight, freeze muscle, but it also runs and integrates through your shoulders and back. So people that are at work and they get the sore shoulders for the deadline sort of thing, they're under the pressure, that's the muscle that's activating because it wants to mobilize, it wants to escape. That's our primal. So to actually have that tension release is to lie on your back and have your legs sort of like moving in and out, and it actually instigates a tremor throughout our body. So it's actually releasing tension stored in the body. It kind of looks like an epileptic seizure in a way, but you're controlled, you're safe in it, and you can stop and start whenever you want. but it's releasing that stored tension. It's kind of like having a whole body massage, but you're sort of like shaking on the ground. And prior to me doing that, that was actually the one that was the preventive from me actually getting admitted into a mental health ward at a hospital. So the story behind that briefly was I had my major trauma reaction. I re-went under medication. I had to go to like sort of a inpatient review with a nurse, and the only thing that was stopping me from being admitted was me actually advocating for myself, because I was with the ex-wife and the ex-mother-in-law, and the ex-wife was keen on me being admitted. But I was advocating for myself to actually wait and try this TRE exercise to release the tension. And they said, okay, well, we'll see how you go. They had me on just brief medication. I had a Zoom session. They released the tension. And prior to me actually having that tension relief, my breath was just like this. My body was so constricted, armored up from just the trauma, that my breathing was just that's how I was breathing, and I could hardly move. Lying on a comfortable bed was like lying on cement sort of thing. I did the tension release, and I could actually move. I could actually, like, I remember going out and working in the garden. It's like I had freedom of movement. So these two, which more weren't working with the rational mind, was working with the body, actually started to free up my way of thinking, and was actually the first step. But you can't deal with a trigger if you're already triggered. So if you're already in a state of trauma, then any sort of rational reasoning with a brain that's in a state of fight, flight, freeze, it's interested in survival. It'll probably grasp the concepts of the logistical, like, yes, I shouldn't be doing this, I shouldn't be doing that, but it's going to be always reacting, always receiving. And if it's in an environment where you have this and then you return to it, then it's going to be kind of always like a kind of a catch-up sort of thing. It's like, oh, okay, it's like I feel safe in this place, I feel understood, and then I go to an environment where I'm like, the triggers start to get triggered and then I return, and it's like, so it feels like a never-ending battle. So if you start to address the emotional charge in the body, then your cognitive mind starts to come online, in your actual ability. Is if you're feeling safer in yourself, like say with your singing sort of thing, it's very hard to be creative if you're in a state of like fear because you're not interested in like being creative. It's like, how do I keep myself safe? Yeah.
That's thank you for sharing that, Dion. And that's fascinating, because I'm not very familiar with EFT myself. Like, and I, for those listening that are new to this, correct me if I'm wrong, Dion. It stands for Emotional Freedom Technique. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the reason I had seen some EFT before, the reason that your content was significant to me, so I discovered your content actually before I started the podcast, and it was a video you had on YouTube about healing narcissistic abuse with the doing the EFT techniques. And I agree with you 100% that when it comes to the C-PTSD recovery, incorporating any somatic or any body-based practice is so key. So I'm with you. Like, the body keeps the score. The body is storing all these trauma responses. And just shout out to Dr. Besser van der Kolk. I haven't read the book, but I know he's written a whole book on the matter. And when I'm hearing you describe how it works, when I'm hearing you talk about how when we're in a trigger state, our brains get, for lack of a better word, they get hijacked. When we're in that trigger dysregulation state, logic is, we might be hearing it. Sure, the words are coming in, but they're not getting processed. And it's really fascinating to hear, there's this practice that you can do that can help re-regulate the body back down, so you can actually process what's happening. And in a way, from some of the videos that I've seen you do, and I would love to hear a little bit more about this too. Now, this is not just something to do when we're dysregulated or when we're having a trigger. This is something that can be done any other time to help our bodies keep processing and releasing the trauma. Is that right, Dion? Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, I mean, think of it as emotional hygiene. It's like we brush our teeth every morning, sort of thing, to keep our teeth nice and fresh, sort of thing. It'd be nice to keep our body nice and fresh and our minds nice and fresh to face the challenges of the day. And there's always going to be challenges, even if they're positive challenges. Um, so you want to be able to be in a good mind state to be able to navigate through life. And pretty much what you said is what EFT tapping actually starts to deregulate is the amygdala. There's a thing called the amygdala hijack where it hijacks the cognition. So think of your road rage incidents. You're sitting in the car watching someone go off at someone else because whatever reason, and you're thinking, well, I wouldn't do that. It's this illogical sort of thing. It's because the logical part of the mind has been hijacked by this person as a representation of something that's happened in their day, and they're letting loose. They're blowing off some steam in a very unhealthy way. Now, EFT tapping, when we're focusing on that distressing thing that has happened, and it can be a food phobia, it can be a food craving, it can be not just a trauma or some form of stress, fear of heights, but we're focusing and feeling where that sits in our body because we normally hold in our body somewhere where it's tense shoulders, our gut gets tense, our breathing gets shallow, these sorts of things. Our legs want to activate. We might be bouncing at the knee, and that bouncing at the knee is, if you think of that as TRE, is our body wanting to discharge. And what do we normally get told when we see a bouncing knee? Stop.
Stop.
And why do we want it to stop? Because it's uncomfortable for someone else. Well, we're in discomfort. So with the EFT, we're actually, when we're stimulating these responses and focusing and also tapping on the meridian points, which are the acupuncture points in the body, and there's now research to back all this up, where when we're stimulating it, we're starting to de-stress that amygdala, which is that part of our limbic system, our emotional processing part of the brain, that has an interaction between the hippocampus, which is our memory part of the brain, where past experiences are stored. And if we've got a lot of past negative experiences, it's going to draw upon that. Or we might think that we have a lot of limiting beliefs of like, well, I can't do that because I'll be a failure because I've been told conditionally in my life that I'm a failure sort of thing. So we have that I can't, that failure to launch feeling because it's like, I'm a failure and I can't launch. So we start to focus on what that would be and tapping on the points and saying it out loud, hearing ourselves say those words will actually start to down-regulate the amygdala. So it's not so much an alarm bell that's ringing all the time and preceding danger, because that's the part of the amygdala. It wants to keep us safe. And it's not relaying that signal to past experiences where past experiences said everything is unsafe because we've had that experience. It's starting to lessen that. So we have a SUD scale, a subjective unit of distress scale, 10 being the highest and 0 being the lowest. And being subjective, it doesn't have to be accurate. So it'd be seeing where you sit on that distress in your body. And we're trying to get it as close to 0 by going through different rounds and starting to de-stress the body, de-stress to calm the body. And once again, if we're feeling calmer, the good thing with EFT tapping, when we feel calmer, it tends to stay. It's not like a short-term thing. So it's kind of like a roller coaster. You have a fear of going on the roller coaster until you go on the roller coaster and you know how long I have that fear. But it's also reducing that fear of going on the roller coaster. So you no longer have that block of like, well, the worst case scenario is going to happen if I go on the roller coaster. It's addressing the worst case scenario, but it's not the worst case scenario. It's the perception of what will happen. And that perception is based upon past experiences of like, well, I want to keep myself safe. I want to keep myself here. And yeah, so the EFT is that part that goes into that amygdala and starts to calm, settle, so that we are not so much limited in our beliefs and limited in our ability to go out and experience life. Because if past experiences have said things are unsafe, then we're going to tend to stay within that. But the unfortunate thing with that is it might feel safe, it just doesn't feel good because we're in that fear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I I'm trying to think of things that anyone new would want to know, and It's coming to mind before I forget to ask you how long can an EFT session, like how long can it last, and how often do you usually see like a particular client to work on a given issue on average? I
Yeah,
would.
it's quite a common question, and I'll answer it in two ways because I think there's two parts to it.
Mm-hmm.
One is your trauma is as individual to you as your healing will be. So everyone will respond to trauma in different ways. You have two people in the same car crash; they'll respond to that, the healing from that, in different ways. So how long it takes will be. Sometimes it's the tip of the iceberg. You might have someone that's dealing with, like, I don't know, like caffeine addiction. They want to stop drinking coffee. So you might start working on that. And you think, okay, well, we've gone to that. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. The caffeine was there to actually be a self-soother for something a little bit more. So it's like, it's that layer of the onion sort of thing. It's like, how deep does it go? Which is very hard to put a time factor. Some people, it might be 7 sessions, 2 sessions. It really depends on, you might have a person with a fairly healthy upbringing, and the issue is the issue, and that's all there is. Or there might be more to an issue if it's dealing with someone else that has used a lot of coping mechanisms to deal with past issues. So that it's a hard thing to actually judge how long it lasts. Typically, it does stay. It's like it, it's kind of like looking at it this way. If you don't fear something, then you have no reason to fear it. So if you reduce the fear, then there's probably a good chance that unless a new fear in that same category of what you're dealing with happens, then it's going to stay. And really, we're just reducing the cortisol, that inflammation in the body, which has so many damaging effects health-wise, long-term, sustained. To answer it the other way is, I think it comes from also a medication mindset of like, I want the pill to take the pain away as quickly as possible. And how we experience our trauma, especially C-PTSD, has been, I mean, it's either complex post-traumatic stress disorder or compound post-traumatic stress disorder. And even if you have like little t trauma, there's a lot of different experiences that happened for you to do that. So to do any sort of trauma release work, any form of like dealing with something that's quite sensitive, you don't want to rip the band-aid off straight away. So there will be a process in it, which doesn't mean that like I want the pain to go away as quick as possible. I want to take the headache medication to take the headache away. I think it comes from that sort of a mindset, but honoring the process of being able to care and nurture for yourself, because as you release some of this stuff, normally there's a 2-day settling period. It's kind of like shaking up a Coke can. You want to kind of let that settle in the body. So you just don't want to go back into that raw emotion straight away. Otherwise, you might get like a trauma overwhelm, a trauma reaction, these sorts of things. So you want to honor your body in that process. And I think the mindset to have is, I'm starting on this healing journey to heal myself, and I am part of that journey to actually take care of myself. So I don't want to rush the process. Of course, there's things that we can take medications for to take the pain away, but I guess having that mindset of like quick enough is not sometimes good enough.
Right. Thank you for explaining it that way, because I think that's and as a survivor myself, it can be tempting when, especially when you're starting your healing journey. Like I can feel, I mean, I feel like that part of me is still a little bit alive in the process. There's that part of me that's like, okay, what's the thing that works like 100% guaranteed in X amount of things? Like, you tell me what is 100% proven, and it only takes 6 months, and sign me up, I'll do it. And it's not that simple. And something that you said, and I want to highlight it for a second. It's the first time I hear that alternative word for the complex PTSD. You said compound PTSD, which, quite frankly, I feel like that's what it should be called, because it really that's really what it is. It's a
Yeah.
compound of traumas on top of trauma, just repeating itself. Like, I feel like that captures the diagnosis a lot better than the word that they're using right now. And that word, like either complex or compound, they both capture how not simple it is. It's
No,
not.
no.
It's gonna be something that's gonna be. I mean, there's no timeline for healing this thing. There is no one way that works for everybody. Like I've heard one thing that I have heard is people that have taken EMDR and have struggled with EMDR. I have heard a camp of these people that have say that EFT was the thing that worked for them. They tried EMDR and
Yeah.
it didn't work. I haven't tried EMDR, so I can't speak about it. Have you tried EMDR at all?
I really wanted to try MDR, but it was like the psychologists were kind of letting me down in a way.
Oh.
And I'll probably explain that. So it sounds like I'm not beating up on psychologists. I There was one psychologist that was actually EFT tapping trained and also EMDR trained, but only recently EMDR trained. So I signed up, did all the paperwork because like there's all the creating safety, there's a whole heap of paperwork even before you go into doing an EMDR session.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got a phone call actually from the psychologist going, well, yeah, it's like, I like, because she had just started seeing me, she goes, yeah, due to your, she worded it in a kind of a way that was almost like blaming me in a way, but I can't remember what she said, but it was basically, the short of it was she was new to EMDR. I
Mm-hmm.
had C-PTSD, which is not a walk in the park. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and she had been talking to her instructor and she was like, well, I might be a bit too new in my EMDR qualification, so I don't feel safe, even though I'd done all this paperwork of like how to feel safe. And all
Yeah.
this,
Hmm.
the actual person themselves was not feeling safe to actually go forth, and the other person was yeah, I didn't feel safe in the sense of like it just didn't feel like a safe environment. It felt like a challenging environment, and it felt like say for example, like I had this water bottle at the time, and
Mm-hmm.
we're in a room by ourselves, and I'm just drinking the water bottle like this. I'm putting the water bottle down, and I look up and I see like the psychologist like watching my every move. It's like, does she think I'm going to?
Oh
I'm
no.
just so it's I didn't feel safe because it's like she felt like she
Mm.
was on guard all the time. So it's like,
Oh.
okay, so I tried for India a couple of times, but yeah, and it's something that I haven't given up on, but it's kind of like finding something that works for me. And strangely, even though I've said all about that with the CBT and all that, there has been an online counselor who was actually the because I organized a marriage counselor when I ended the marriage. But before that, I tried to get like counseling and deal with it. But continued on to see him, and he was also an MBTI practitioner and all that. So it actually made it very easy to relate to him because we had the same typing. But
Mm.
I actually haven't seen him for a little bit. I'm planning on seeing him this year because I wanted to get more into my body sort of thing because I know it sounds bizarre, but it's like give me enough time and I'll figure out what the issue is. Like that,
Mm.
I sort of don't really have that bias. If I know that I'm doing something wrong, I'll hold myself accountable. So if there's
Mm.
something that I'm doing wrong, then it's like, how do I actually deal with it? It's not like, well, I know what's wrong, time to emotionally avoid this.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, well, I don't feel comfortable with this, so yeah.
Yeah. I well, I want to say a few things to you in case that you need to hear them about the people that you try to do EMDR with. The one that said I'm too new for this. I in case you need to hear this like that, that's no reflection on you. I will give it to them. I'm glad that they recognize their limitations. Like it was definitely all about them. So I feel like for us people with CPTSD, like we're definitely not an easy diagnosis to treat. It's a complicated one, and I'm glad that person's like saw their limitations as opposed to just being like, oh, let's have Dion be the guinea pig to see if this thing works on CPTSD. Now, I I hope you don't give up, and if you try it and it doesn't work, that's okay too. Like I've heard of people who like, and usually it's the people who like EFT, like that's their mode of choice. They'll say EMDR just didn't work for me,
Mm.
and for anyone listening, if you have been trying things that haven't worked and you haven't tried EFT yet, I encourage you to give it a try. It's not going to be 100% guaranteed, but I think there is something to be said about the fact that just like the complex PTSD is like a compound complex. Like we all get there in so many different ways. The same can be said about how we're healing these things. And gosh, I honestly, Dion, I want to say this too, and it's, you haven't heard these episodes yet. Dion is a listener too, but there's an interview I did recently. It hasn't come out. As of the point when you and I are having this conversation, by the time that people listen to this, it will have. So for those of you listening, the interview with Gabrielle Marchand, we talk about this issue of like therapy and how it can feel like a needle, like finding a needle in a haystack to find the right therapist with the right modality. And it's almost like all the stars have to align so we can find something that works for us. And I will say, kind of going back into interviewing you and having this conversation with you, when I found your content, you're the only person that I have found. Well, there's one more, but they talk more about C-PTSD. But you're the only EFT practitioner that I have seen online talking about narcissistic abuse in connection, like healing it with EFT, which I find quite fascinating because I came across starting my healing in my search to heal from narcissistic abuse, and this was before I even knew that I had complex PTSD. Can I ask you how does EFT help with narcissistic abuse? And like, are clients coming in specifically asking for that type of healing?
I think it's a weird way to tie it in, but like a very weird way of tying it. But how you were talking about with psychologists and that, and finding the right psychologist. It's about being able to relate to and have a relatable to be able to share and be understood and have a non-judgmental and not be, well, they tick this box and this is the box that I'll see them in now. So you're going to be able to have your experience be able to be shared and communicated with, and also reflected back to you, and also understood that what we went through wasn't nice and it wasn't right. And sometimes it's the environment rather than the person that was trying to survive within their environment. Now, how that ties in with EFT, with narcissistic abuse, is it's a relational experience between us and our caregivers. And much of our belief systems about ourselves cause a lot of stress. It's like thinking about ourselves with low self-worth, that we're not worthy, that we don't deserve, that I am to blame for not being able to stand up to my parents, sort of thing, or my parent was attacking another parent. So kids will relate that back to themselves. I wasn't there to stand up for mum, sort of thing, which are de-stressing experiences, the stressful experiences, sorry. And EFT tapping is a stress reduction tool. At the heart of it, EFT tapping is a stress reduction tool. It was used for Vietnam vets, Dr. Dawson Church, Gary Craig. It was originally started by Dr. Roger Callahan, a psychologist, under thought field therapy to deal with phobias and all this sort of stuff. So it comes from both a psychological and a somatic aspect. So we store emotions in our mind, and we store emotions in our body, our perceptions of ourselves, and how we relate to others, and also how we relate those emotions to ourselves. If we're feeling that we're not being seen, not being heard, then that's not going to feel too good. So no matter under what, whether it's a car crash or whatever it is, there's an aspect of like, I mean, it could be even a beauty thing. It's like, I'm not beautiful enough, so I can't be accepted by other people. So I'll go through all these transformations to be accepted, which an accepted, can I be accepted? Can I be related to? Can I have that love is basically what it comes down to. So it's kind of like uncovering that inner love for ourselves and inner acceptance for ourselves by reducing the stressful experiences around those negative experiences stored in that hippocampus that's activating, that's making us do things that probably aren't, I don't want to say rational in the sense of like it doesn't make sense, but it because it does make sense. We're doing it to get that love. Same as far as like drug addiction sort of thing. It's like you could look at the drug as bad or the person as bad, but that they're using that to self-soothe that they didn't get that love. So that's that temporary form of bliss sort of thing to escape, and that so they can feel for themselves. But to empower one's experience, to actually reduce those stressful experiences, to be able to accept ourselves, is with it by not avoiding the issue, but to start to reduce the issue, to start to deal with those stressful experiences. And dealing it with a talk sort of a form, I won't say is not helpful, but it goes back to that trigger and the charge sort of thing. It's like we want to decharge the charge, that fight, flight, freeze response, that need to do something, to activate towards something and start to deactivate that need. But the EFT doesn't take the memory away; it just takes the intensity around the memory away. So it's reducing that stress. So it's not like it's mind warping you or reducing and that. And the other thing is, like, people will say, "Well, it kind of feels like I'm going into a meditation and that." But if you're carrying a lot of stress, it's like that was a lot of tension that I was carrying in my body before the TRE sort of thing. It was not a nice feeling, but it's kind of like letting go of that emotional baggage. And when you let go, you feel looser and you feel calmer. So you feel like you're going into a meditative state, because an activated state is a very energized state because we're always perceiving danger. Clients booking in for that, it really comes down to if clients want to book in for that. It's like currently it's like it's a bit of a low period. So, but I think people find solace in the videos, but it's also knowing in EFT there's global tapping and there's specific tapping. Global is more, I might touch upon a few issues that are very specific to you, but then I go on and address a whole other issues that aren't. And that stuff that's specific to you, that's the stuff that we want to be doing one-on-one. That's the stuff that we want to be dealing deeper with. That's the layer of the onion where there's the actual emotional release, the freedom from it. And that's EFT tapping is emotional freedom technique. So anything that's not free is confined. So it's that constriction within the body, which is tension, chronic tension.
Yeah. Yeah. And hearing you talk about the tension, like it's coming to mind as I'm hearing it is how many of us, and I'll speak for myself here, like chronic pain and all these issues, like relaxing is really hard for me. Like I got a massage earlier today, and I could feel my body just like I know it's weird because I that this being in my body is all I know, but I know deep down that that's not what relax should feel like. I feel so tense. And I'm like, I should be in this room relaxing, and I'm still feeling so like just my whole body feels like I'm ready to like jump and run if something happens. And I'm supposed to be in a spa like relaxing. And what I like about the EFT tapping, like how you approach it and how you're speaking about it, is it not only goes to the root of the issue, which I think is so important, but also is working on getting the body to be exposed more to that state of being more relaxed, of being more at ease. It's almost like creating safety in our own bodies, which if you have complex PTSD, that might sound like a foreign concept, like being safe in my body. That's why I'm using this stuff. That's why I'm always inside my head. Like, I get it. I totally do. And the thing is, like, we deserve to feel safe in our bodies. We absolutely do. Um, I'm just trying to be a curious curious gem over here. Um, how long have you been doing, like, since you discovered EFT tapping? Was it back in 2018 then, or was it a little bit later than
Yeah,
that?
that's a good question.
Yeah.
I've never actually thought about that. It's kind of like with my age, it's like people ask how old I am. I have to stop and think, because it's not like I wake up and go, oh, I'm like this age today.
Mm-hmm.
It's it probably would have probably been either 2019 or 2020, because I actually did it with my ex-wife at the time. She was the first one that found the course, and then I jumped on. And then, yeah, I just kind of had a flair with it, and then decided to start the business.
Mm-hmm.
And I was offering a breath work there at the time, but I've changed that breath work now.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, yeah, it's probably been a few years now, and doing the videos is kind of like, it's good in a way, and it's kind of like, once again, it's like, it's not a proper, because there's different, like what you're seeing on the videos is just the basic recipe of EFT. It's just typing on the points, and it's kind of like kind of a narrative form where it's like there's basic EFT tapping where I'm writing down the keywords of what you're saying, and I'm just repeating that back to you. I might ad lib a little bit just to get to the issue if I sort of see there's a bit of psychological reversal in that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also other forms, like there's tell the story technique. There's where we just keep going over, and it's kind of like a form of exposure therapy where we just keep narrating that stressful experience and tapping on it. And every time there's a physical reaction, we go back and tap on it. There's the constricted breathing technique. If you've got tight chest, how to open up. There's the movie technique. There's borrowed benefits. There's for group EFT tapping. There's all these sorts of things where you can. So there's a lot of different sides to actually definitely what I've been trained, and there's also a level 3 that I'll hopefully be doing next year because I'm level 2 at the moment. So there's a lot of things that I can actually do. It's just hard to show that on a YouTube video because it's like you kind of need another person to do it. So that's where it comes down to the basic EFT. So, but it is a good way of just trying out different things and incorporating different things. But yeah, but that said, if people get benefit from it, then that's the main thing at the end of the day. So, but yeah, but one thing I'd say with EFT tapping is it's a complementary therapy, and I think every therapy, like there's the complementary therapies and then the official therapies. It's like that every therapy is complementary to each other, and even your experiences in life is complementary to the therapy. So there's no this is the therapy and then you doing life sort of thing. So what I mean by that is the EFT tapping will help de-stress the body, get it to a calmer state where it's more receptive. It's not so constricted all the time. It's not the closed fist, it's the open hand that's receptive to life. And we're more receptive to different perspectives about ourselves. We're not so much closed-minded. We're not so much tunnel vision on things. We're not so much reactive to situations. So we're more fertile ground for even things where it does come to like a cognitive behavior where we start to retrain, because taking the medication away, it's like it just exposes me to the trauma. But if I reduce the trauma, it doesn't mean that the behaviors change, because if I've been taught faulty ways of doing things, I kind of want to relearn that through someone that can actually help guide, train new behaviors. Otherwise, it's like de-stressing myself. I might feel calmer in myself, but I also might follow old patterns that get me into the same. It's like going by past programming, even though there's not the stress there. It's like I do what I know. It's like I can't speak another language if I don't know it, sort of thing. So it's relearning a new way of speaking to myself. So I think with EFT tapping, it's a good complementary to other therapies, but also other therapies are good complementary to EFT, even EMDR. It's like we'll start to deregulate a lot of the stressful experiences, but it's also like making meaning of that sort of thing. How do I reintegrate into society? These sorts of things, like things like they talk about ayahuasca and all that sort of stuff, which is great, but it's also you have that experience, but it's an isolated experience in a jungle sort of thing, and like you have this, and then you got to reintegrate into societal stress. So it's also how do I navigate myself as a person going into that sort of thing, or do I just go at it haphazard? So everything integrates with everything, and it's also how you integrate with your experiences. And sometimes, similar to how people were perceiving me prior to the schizoaffective diagnosis sort of thing, it's also because I've changed doesn't mean they'll change. so they'll still be going with that same experience. So how do I navigate that with a little bit more grace? How do I make my boundaries known without just going, well, they should just magically know my boundaries? How do I start to enforce that with a little bit more boundary? So that comes with, like, even though you're de-stressing, it's good to do that. Well, relearn things without the emotional charge behind it, where it's not so much easily triggered sort of thing. So everything complements everything. It's also how you complement your own life.
That makes so much sense. And you're bringing an interesting piece into the table. And I didn't expect to go there today, but I kind of want to dive in a little bit deeper. And the perception of other people, like the toxic people in our life, doesn't matter what diagnosis we have. If we have no diagnosis, if we have a misdiagnosed, or if we get to the bottom of of what exactly we have, uh, you are so right. Like to toxic people in our lives, we already have a label, and the label is something's wrong with us, and that's all they can see. And I think that's so important. I think when we're doing our healing, like grasping, and this is something that was so hard for me to grasp at the beginning. I can be doing all the work in the world and all the techniques and have all the resources. And if they're not changing, when I get back into the room with them, it's going to be a hot mess again. Because it takes everybody has to put in their part to actually change the dynamic. And I think when you start working on your trauma and you start whichever technique you're using, your body is starting to feel safer. You're not so caught up in the trauma response, the flight, fawn, freeze, fight. You start seeing things around you clearer too. I think that's part of the reason I missed the abuse around me for so long, because I was so caught up in surviving that my brain had no bandwidth left to register, oh, these people are harmful to me. Like I didn't have anything left at the end of the day to even make that realization. And when doing work like this, where your mind, like I hear you talking about, like you're more susceptible to other experiences, your mind's opening up to like see things that you didn't see before. That's the time where a lot of us, and I'll speak for myself here, that's the time when I started going, like looking around me and being like, oh,
Mhm.
oh, we got a deeper problem now. And all right, survivors, how are you feeling so far? I hope you have enjoyed part one of this conversation as much as I enjoyed talking to Dion. I invite you to join us next week for part two, where Dion and I will dive deeper into opportunities that can be found when you face the unknown, the importance of attunement when healing from relational trauma, how pets can impact the recovery of a survivor of complex trauma, the significance of finding your voice, and more. Please leave a comment and let us know how this conversation impacted you. In this week's healing invitation, I want to offer you an exercise and a bonus invitation. As you go through your week, can you name the emotions you are experiencing throughout the day? As survivors, we often struggle with pinpointing how we feel or naming the emotion we are experiencing. If you are like me and figuring out your emotions sounds impossible sometimes, I got you covered. Lindsay Bremen is an artist with an account on Instagram who focuses her content on mental health education. And one of her posts includes an emotion and behavior wheel that I will link to the show notes. You are welcome to use this wheel to help you name what you are experiencing throughout the day. Emotions are very important, and I think learning to name them is a good place to start healing our relationship with our emotions. Notice which emotions you feel more during the week, which ones you did not experience. I hope this data can help you learn something about yourself. I also invite you to carve out some time to try an EFT tapping video. Dion recently released on his channel a video that was inspired by a quote from June, a member of my chosen family that I interviewed for Hello Trauma Brain. I will link the episodes for Healing and Friendships with June Part 1 and 2 in the show notes. Dion's EFT tapping video was inspired by June saying, "Beggars can't be choosers." I will link Dion's EFT video on this concept to the episode for any of you that would like to give it a try. Lastly, I invite you to join me next week for a special healing invitation from Dion. Please let me know how this week's healing invitations go if you choose to accept them. Before we wrap up this episode, all music and production is courtesy of yours truly. Also, I want to share a few ways you can help support this podcast. You can subscribe and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or the platform you are using to listen. Share this episode with anyone you can think can benefit from this content. Follow Hello Trauma Brain on Instagram with the handle at Hello Trauma Brain. Subscribe to the Hello Trauma Brain YouTube channel and hit the notification bell to be the first to know when I post a new episode. And you can make a donation by getting me a coffee through the official bio site. No worries, all links will be provided in the show notes. Thank you for joining me and Dion today. We hope you found this episode helpful. I wish you the best as you heal your relationship with your emotions. It is time for our farewell affirmations. You are welcome to repeat after me. I am enough. I am lovable. And I deserve to heal. I wish you a gentle week, and thank you for listening.